Chevron, and again, like every oil major, refuses to admit is that they have to decrease emissions. So we're now in a situation that the oil industry finally admits that emissions have to go down to have any chance to confront the climate crisis, to have any chance to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement. Some even admit that emissions have to be reduced by 40%. This is just what science is telling us. 40% reduction on a global basis by 2030.
Hi, my name is Komatsuki from Proxy Watch in Japan. And climate change, the climate change discussion between companies and the shareholders are getting intense. So today I'm going to talk with Mr. Mark van Baal from Follow This, a founder of Follow This in Netherlands. And he has been engaging with oil majors and asking them to disclose their reduction emission targets of GHG. And this year he talked to Chevron, one of the biggest US oil major, and he filed a shareholder resolution asking them to disclose their emission targets of GHG, and his proposal was approved, getting over 60% of shareholder support. He made a great case this year. So let's ask Mark what the behind the scene of this big case is like. Hi, Mark. What are the specific problems that you wanted to bring up shareholder resolution to Chevron? Could you tell me from the basics?
Yeah, what happened yesterday on the 11th of October is that Chevron set a so-called Scope 3 target, a target to reduce the emissions of their products. And that's really a big step for an oil major, because before we file shareholder resolutions, in which we ask for that, every oil major says Scope 3 are product emissions. That's not our problem. That's not our responsibility. That's up to the consumers. Sometimes they even say, we don't know what our customers do with our products. I always say, I think they burn them. But that's the position of every oil major before we start asking for Scope 3 targets. So Chevron really crossed the Rubicon by setting a Scope 3 target, because now we finally have something to talk about. Having said that, I also have to say that it was a very weak target. They promised to reduce their carbon intensity, so that's an average number, by 5% by 2028. Yeah, we've called it disappointing tokenism. This will bring us nowhere near the Paris Climate Agreement, and that's what we are in this for.
Thank you. Great. Your achievement itself, getting the over 60% majority vote, approval rate is fantastic. And did ISS and Grassroots and other institutional investors were interested in your view and proposal from the beginning?
Yeah. No, in the beginning, when we filed our first resolution at Shell here in the Netherlands, we are a Dutch organization. We started in 2015. I basically started on my own. So we had to start somewhere. So I started with Royal Dutch Shell. And in 2016, we filed our first resolution calling for Paris consistent emission reduction targets for all emissions, so Scope 1, 2, and 3. We got 2.7% of the votes, which is very small, although you have to take into account that all other resolutions receive over 99% of the vote. So normally I always call it a North Korean outcome. But so if a resolution gets 2.7%, you know that there are some shareholders who want the company to change. The year after, it was over 6%, and that was enough for Shell to respond in the same way like Chevron responded yesterday, by setting a very weak Scope 3 targets. But again, this is a very significant step, because if a company doesn't want to talk about Scope 3, there's basically nothing to talk about.
Great. Chevron are sort of surrounded by many ESG activists and NGOs, Newground social investment. were pointing out that they have sort of connections with the military in Myanmar, and they had also cruel things to lawyers who pointed out that they are doing bad things in Ecuador. What are the things that you think we should be looking at, the problems of the governance over their corporate culture of Chevron this time?
Yeah, first we have to be absolutely sure that they don't fund climate denial anymore. They've done this for decades, like every oil major, there's no exception. But that's, I think, the most important thing, that they don't fund any climate denying senator, congressman, or whoever in politics. We're not sure yet, but at least Chevron is admitting that climate change is real and that the oil industry has a key role to play, that emissions have to go down. The only thing Chevron, and again, like every oil major, refuses to admit is that they have to decrease emissions. So we're now in a situation that the oil industry finally admits that emissions have to go down to have any chance to confront the climate crisis, to have any chance to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement. Some even admit that emissions have to be reduced by 40%. This is just what science is telling us. 40% reduction on a global basis by 2030. So even some of them admit that, but then they say, of course, but not us, because we will be in the other 60%. And when every oil major wants to be in the other 60%, no progress will be made.
Thank you. We've also seen that ExxonMobil was beaten by the engine number one, which is quite new and a small fund. They recommended the new director in their board, and interestingly, we are seeing that Chevron is putting the TV ads, emphasizing that they are caring the environment from last year and this year, and some reports from the Wall Street Journal pointing out that they are sort of building a guard to activists. And do you see these Chevron, these changes of Chevron as a good thing, that you want to push them to take Scope 3 seriously?
Yeah, of course, we need every force available to compel big oil to change, because they won't do it on their own accord. When I started Follow This, I sometimes dreamt of an epiphany of an oil major CEO having an emotional debate with one of their children, a sleepless night, and then would suddenly see the light and announce that their company would really invest in renewables, would really drive the energy transitions towards renewables. That's not going to happen. These men, they're all men, save for I think the CEO of Occidental Petroleum in the US, but these are all men who have been very successful in oil and gas and cannot imagine a world and a business model without oil and gas. So they won't do it on their own accord. So we need every pressure possible to make them change. So this means shareholders, consumers, policymakers, courts, new people in the board, like engine number one did with Exxon, shareholder resolutions and votes for shareholder resolutions. So we need every tool in the toolbox to make these companies change. But let's face the fact, big oil can make or break the Paris Accord. If they continue like they want to continue, there will be no chance that we'll meet the Paris Accord, and we will end up, our children, our grandchildren will end up in a world which is devastated by climate change. So that's where we're up against. And the good thing is that now shareholders, big institutional investors, pension funds fully realize how much a threat climate change is to all their shares. So also to their shares in real estate, agriculture, their shares in the world economy. And they say, okay, now we have to force these oil majors to change. It's a slow process. It's too slow, as you've seen. We have a very fair ask. That's just to ask the oil companies to commit to the Paris Climate Agreement, and the support slowly rises from 2.7% at Shell, now at 30% at Shell, and some majorities in the US. So shareholders have to step up their engagement and voting. And that's the only way, that's a crucial part of all the tools the world has to make this incumbents change.
Great, thank you. So next year, do you plan to continue fighting the resolutions to other oil majors like Shell, BP, Total,
yes,
for example?
Yeah, we have to continue this until they are fully Paris consistent. And that will happen when they will tell their shareholders to vote for our resolutions. We have a very optimistic supporting resolution. We literally say shareholders support the company to set Paris consistent targets and invest accordingly. So as soon as they say shareholders, please vote for this, they will have a shareholder mandate to drive the energy transition, to make bold and brave decisions to change their companies. But until that date, until they are fully Paris aligned, and not only the targets will be right, but also the investments will be right, and also the emissions will really go down. Until that time, I think our shareholder resolutions are needed. So we will file again at Shell, BP, Chevron, Exxon next year, because they need these shareholder resolutions to make any steps. You've seen this with Chevron. They did not want to talk about Scope 3 at all until 61% of the shareholders voted for a climate resolution, and now suddenly they have a very vague Scope 3 target. So voting for shareholder resolutions, and more investors realize this, is a crucial part of getting these oil majors to do anything about climate change.
Thank you.
I felt very powerless until I've realized I have to ask the right people, the people who can make a difference. And these are the CEOs of the oil majors. So the almost 8,000 people who joined our movement now feel empowered to address the people who can make a difference. So that's what we're basically doing, empowering ordinary citizens to become a shareholder, an owner of an oil and gas major, and then force them for change.